The next two presenters, Erika Travor and Toolis, are in my American Literature from 1865 course. I know they're going to ask you, so I'm not going to ask you, but I am curious to know what the answer will be when she asks how many of you have read Gilman's The Yellow Wallpaper, a very creepy, dark tale that somehow these two have managed to make creepier and darker. And they presented their theory to me of what they thought this story was really about. And I said, well, I really hope you're going to write about that in your weekly paper, because that sounds like a stretch to me. And make sure you support it from the text. They did. And at that point I said, okay, we need to talk about honors project. So, Erika, Corby, come scare us.
Okay. Alrighty. So, as Dr. Seals said, how many of you guys have actually read The Yellow Wallpaper? Oh, yay. Okay, this is going to be easier. So, those of you who haven't, we're going to give you our quick recap of what it's about. The story begins with an enthusiastic woman relaying the details of the Colonial Mansion summer vacation home her husband has secured. After everything seems completely normal, until she begins to confide in the reader about small details that illuminate her descent into madness. She says things like,
John laughs at me, of course, but one expects that in a marriage.
The audience only receives journal-like glimpses throughout the story. After learning about the Colonial Mansion, her next entry is inside the mansion. She gives the audience a tour of her vacation bedroom, describing it as,
It is a big, airy room, a whole floor nearly, with windows that look all ways, and the air and sunshine galore. It was a nursery first, and then a playground, and then a gymnasium, I should judge, for the windows are barred for little children, and there are rings and things in the wall. The paint and paper look as if a boys' school has used it. It is stripped off, the paper, in great patches all around the head of my bed, about as far as I can reach. And in a great place, on the other side of the room, low down. I never saw a worse paper in my life. One of those sprawling, flamboyant patterns committing every artistic sin.
At this point in the story, the audience receives evidence to justify their doubt in her sanity, and the evidence just keeps on flowing. She begins to obsess over the yellow wallpaper. She decides,
This paper looks to me as if it knew what a vicious influence it had.
She obsesses with how the moonlight creeps in through the window and casts the light upon the wallpaper. She describes the wallpaper in the moonlight as creepy and undulating. No, scratch that, it's alive. She has convinced herself that there's actually a woman behind the wallpaper. She can see her through the windows and in the moonlight. It is this woman trying desperately to escape the wallpaper. She insists.
At night, in any kind of light, in twilight, candlelight, lamplight, and worst of all, by moonlight, it becomes bars. The outside pattern, I mean. The woman behind it, as plain as can be.
She proclaims her dislike for the wallpaper by saying,
It is the strangest yellow, that wallpaper. It makes me think of all the yellow things I ever saw. Not beautiful ones like buttercups, but old, foul, bad yellow things.
The audience can see her obsession growing with the wallpaper as she unknowingly presses herself against it, describing it intricately.
There's a funny mark on this wall, low down, near the mopboard, a streak that runs around the room. It goes behind every piece of furniture, except the bed. A long, straight, even smooch, as if it had been rubbed over and over. I wonder how it was done, and who did it, and what they did it for. Round and round and round and round. It makes me dizzy.
Her ability to identify reality from her delusions diminishes with every entry. Her obsession with the woman is in full swing at the point when she confesses,
I think that woman gets out in the daytime, and I'll tell you why. Privately, I've seen her. I can see her out of every one of my windows. It is the same woman, I know, for she is always creeping, and most women do not creep by daylight.
Now that she is certain of the existence of the woman, she sets her mind to freeing this wallpaper-trapped woman. Recall She said the top pattern was like bars over top the underlayer.
If only that top pattern could be gotten off from the under one. I mean to try it, little by little.
In the climactic ending, she locks the door and throws the key out the window. She tries frantically to tear the paper off in the last effort to free the woman. Her husband comes to the door. Upon discovering it is locked, he pounds on the door and calls for an axe. When her husband finally gets through the door, he is greeted with a woman saying,
I've got out at last, in spite of you and Jane, and I've pulled off most of the paper, so you can't put me back. Now why should that man have fainted? But he did, right across my path, by the wall, so I'd have to creep over him every time.
Okay, so there's two main interpretations of the story that remain popular throughout time. One of them being the Gothic, and one being the feminist. Okay, so for the Gothic interpretation, in May of 1892, the New England magazine published The Yellow Wallpaper. It was greeted with much opposition. The Gothic quality of the story received a mention from H.P. Lovecraft himself. And there are two ways that you can interpret Gothic, restrictive and oblivion, according to Francis Auld. The two main ways they're interpreted, the Yellow Wallpaper fits both. Good way to remember restrictive is a good pair of shoes that just don't fit right. This can be seen in the Yellow Wallpaper as the house, the wallpaper, and the very room that contains her. Whereas oblivion, imagine walking down some steps, missing one, and falling and catching yourself. This can also be seen as her descent into madness.
And for the feminist, this story was rediscovered in the 19th century, and people began to incorporate feminist into the title. And now it is widely known as a feminist Gothic story. Gilman once suffered from postpartum depression, and well-known Dr. Will Mitcher prescribed the rest cure for it. Gilman claims in Why I Wrote the Yellow Wallpaper that I obeyed these directions for some 3 months and came so near the borderline of utter mental ruin that I could see over it. She wrote The Yellow Wallpaper to show Dr. Mitchell how terrible the rest cure was in hopes of convincing him to stop prescribing it. Critics say there are many feminist connotations and much feminist symbolism within the Yellow Wallpaper. For starters, the wallpaper itself is a feminist symbol. Here are a few more examples for you. The bed being nailed to the floor can be seen as a woman's duty to have and raise children. And the wallpaper's two dimensions represent the woman in the underlayer and then the oppressive patriarchal society in the top layer. And there are many more examples we could give, but it's all been heard before, and what we're here to show you is something completely new. It's our interpretation. So while reading the entries, the truth in what she writes comes into question, but truth is subjective to the interpreter's own experience. One cannot claim the absolute truth. One can only interpret what they see. The interpretation of reality by the woman in the Yellow Wallpaper begins with obvious minor delusions interspersed with what seems like larger periods of reality. And as the audience reads on, though, the balance shifts and we follow her descent into madness. She claims the existence of a woman in the wallpaper, and this is supported by Heidi Scott, who states she eventually determines that it is a woman whom she must liberate. With her delusion of everything around her, the woman in the wallpaper could very well be her. With that, we believe that she is not picking at the wall the entire time, but at some point she begins physically to pick at herself and rub away and pick at her own skin.
There are several areas in the text that support this theory. An early example is her transition from wallpaper to skin is when she states, "This dead paper is a great relief to my mind." Dead being the operative word. It wasn't enough just to say paper.
The part about the smooch that runs around the room ends with the woman getting dizzy, indicating, in my opinion, that she is the one creeping around the room and rubbing her shoulders and the hips of her clothes on the wall. After she rubs herself against the paper for a while, her clothing and skin are going to wear down, and her skin will burn, blister, and peel. And I think this is the first solid example where we can see her transition from peeling only the wallpaper to peeling away at her own skin.
She becomes obsessed with getting the wallpapers off. She says, "It's stripped off the paper in great patches all around the head of my bed, as far as I can reach. Conveniently, only where she can reach." This could be due to her lying on the bed and stripping off the paper that we believe is her skin. She can only throw it so far, of course, so it would be just around the bed. If one tears enough skin away, you're eventually going to reach the dermis, which is going to be sticky. The dermis is a thick layer of skin with extensive networks of blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, and nerve endings, and nerve fibers. The dermis consists of two major layers. We want to focus on the papillary layer, which consists of connective tissue, a rich blood supply, and rich blood capillaries. So when the woman says that the wallpaper, as before, was torn off in spots, and sticketh closer than a brother, this could be seen as another example of flesh. It's hard to separate.
With peeling off layers of skin and throwing them around the room, a couple of things are going to happen. One, the flesh will begin to decay, and as our unnamed narrator says, it changes as the light changes. We don't really think that it's light so much as time, and as time goes by, the paper starts to change and become dead and decaying, and with decaying flesh, an odor would appear, and as our unnamed narrator says, but there's something about the paper, the smell. The woman continues on by saying, but now I'm used to it. The only thing I can think of is that it's like the color of the paper, a yellow smell.
Closer to the ending of the story, she is talking about how it's the last day and she needs to get the paper off. When the moon came up, she began to tear away at the paper. I pulled and she shook. I shook and she pulled. And by morning, we had peeled off yards of this. So now I want you guys to imagine for me, scratching yourself and hurting yourself. What do? I know I shake my hand if it's where I hurt, thinking it's going to make it feel better. So this leads us to believe that that's what she's talking about here, pulling off more skin and shaking because of the pain. The final straw that made us believe that it was flesh in the ending was when her husband, or physician, finally came through the door. He says, "What are you doing?" and then faints. Bringing into question, what can make a doctor faint? Well, walking in on a woman peeling off her own skin and the overwhelming odor of the decaying flesh could do it.
Sometimes people are complicit in furthering their own delusions to the point of which they are no longer aware of their own self-destruction. Though it is easy to say that the unnamed narrator is slowly losing her sanity and tell yourself that you are nothing like her, each of us has ways of justifying lies, and in part, the behavior results from seeing the world in a way that makes the behavior acceptable.